You might be like, why does this guy have this big ass shit-eating grin on his face, huh? Well, ladies and gentlemen, there's two things today. I just turned 43, and also, ladies and gentlemen, god damn, Epic Games is actually winning against Apple. Actually did a pretty good backhand pimp slap. You know, it's always a funny day when I see big tech companies take a massive L, and the world kind of shifts because of it, right? Now, Apple, you know, me and Apple have never been the best of homies, obviously, as many of you guys can imagine, right? I've ragged on them through the years, but I've also given them their flowers whenever they needed it, right? Like, I guess that's the saying these days. Now, I use an iPhone not primarily because I enjoy the iPhone platform. There's two things, iMessage, FaceTime, that, you know, I utilize with other iPhone people. Some people that will not consider switching to Android because it may be too difficult to learn, even though not the case. But, you know, I really don't care what phone company you use or what phone brand you use. At the end of the day, as long as this thing can browse the internet, you know, read an email, play some goddamn, like, gotcha games every once in a while, because I know we're all degenerates like that. That's all that really matters, right? Like, who cares? You can have the cheapest phone or the most expensive phone. It really doesn't matter. But, you know, whether you're iOS or Team Android, I think we all agree watching this channel, we should own our phones and be allowed to put whatever we want on our phones, okay? Now, in some countries, like the European Union, okay, some regions of the world, I wouldn't say the EU is a country, Apple lost so significantly that you, the user, can install third-party app stores onto your phone and install emulators, play Fortnite, which is the focus of today's story, okay? Now, 4 years ago in 2020, Epic Games decided to do the unthinkable. They defied Apple, okay? So what they did was, if you actually had loaded up Fortnite on your iPhone, you would have seen a screen like this. How much do you want to pay? So for 1,000 V-buckaroonies, which are valued around $8, if you go through Apple Store, which is basically the default you know, way to go through, it's what Apple forces upon everyone, you have to pay $9.99. Now you might be like, well, Muda, why is this significantly more than the $7.99? It's because Apple is charging the 30% tax, which not just Apple, but Google and pretty much anybody with a storefront does, okay? And even if you go to consoles like, you know, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, they do the same thing. If you go to PC platforms like Steam, Epic also, or really anything, they all do the same. The reason why it's so important on iPhone is that Apple is the only guy you can go through for downloading applications onto your phone. As long as you're not in the EU, obviously. Now, what Epic did was right underneath that option, they said, yeah, you can just pay $7.99 and get the same amount of V-bucks. So you don't have to pay Apple's tax. Now, you can imagine Apple brought out the fucking pimp cane and removed Fortnite from the App Store, okay? And this, ladies and gentlemen, triggered what is known as one of the biggest gaming controversies at the time, free Fortnite, okay? Now, I believe they even made a whole skin in the game for it. And, you know, if you ever looked at Apple's history, like if some of you are old like me, you probably noticed like Apple made ads parodying 1984. Like this was back in the day, in the 80s, when Apple was basically not the evil, monopolistic, crazy company that they are now. And, you know, obviously, you know, what is that one saying from the Batman movies? You either live long enough to, you either die or live long enough to be the villain. Well, Apple decided to be the George Orwellian bad guy in this situation. To the point where Epic Games decided, you know what, even though most of our audience isn't old enough to get the joke, they remade the exact same ad in Fortnite. And this is what they had to say at the time after defying them. Epic Games has defied the Apple Store monopoly. In retaliation, Apple is blocking Fortnite from 1 billion devices. Join the fight at Tilted Towers to stop 2020 from becoming 1984. You know, man, I love that shit. You know, in some capacity, you have to love it when multi-billion-dollar companies are going at each other with this level of, like, online beef. And gamers are just kind of sitting and lapping it up, man. Like, I mean, there is, you know, if you ever have to, like, just sit outside the scope of this entire world and explain this to some normie, they just think you're crazy. They think you need to be in the goddamn loony bin. But yeah, anyways, Fortnite was gone, and for years they had one of the biggest court battles, one of the biggest court cases going on legally, Apple versus Epic. Now, depending on who would win this case, this would be a severe either reinforcement of shitty online store practices, or if Epic won, like they did today, a lot of these storefronts wouldn't have to pay Apple that 30% tax. Now, before we go into this case, you might be like, well, Muda, shouldn't we be paying Apple that tax? Because ultimately it is their storefront. And to an extent, I kind of agree with you. But generally speaking, if you're the only player in town, it can also be construed as some level of extortion, right? Remember, Epic Games produces the title, they run the server space, Apple handles distribution of the app, but they don't really do anything when it comes to distribution of an in-game microtransaction or, micro DLC like that too. So realistically, you might be like, why are we paying Apple 30% of these V-Bucks when all they do is just allow users from their platform to purchase from another storefront anyways? I mean, it's clearly Apple, using the situation to get 30%, right? And it's not just Apple, like I said, it's Google, it's Nintendo, it's Sony, it's Microsoft, it's basically anyone with the storefront, Steam, Valve, whatever, right? This is not okay anywhere you go, but you have to start the battle kind of somewhere, you know what I mean? Like, you have to start the battle anywhere, and the battle started with Apple versus Epic. So the battle between two Tims started, Tim Cook and Tim Sweeney. And when you go to the iPhone, you'll probably see overall pretty decent phones. You look at the prices for these and it's like, I want to just reinforce, when you're paying like $1,000 for the most premium iPhone out there, I really think for $1,000, you, the user, should be allowed to install from any app store you want to, okay? And Apple should probably tell you, hey, installing any app that's not from us could be ridden with malware. And you know what? Give users the freedom. It's crazy how people pay like laptop, desktop PC prices for literal like smartphones, which could easily be desktop, laptop replacements for a lot of people. And suddenly you have to be treated like, you're the Fisher Price of cell phones. Compared to Android, where when you buy an Android phone, you literally can just install from any app store. In fact, with Android, the beautiful part about it is you can just nuke the operating system for the most part and just reinstall it with a different ROM if the phone actually allows it. I don't understand how Apple can continue to do this and literally no one fights against this. Like, if Apple just gave the option for freedom on their phones, honest to God, I feel like a lot of the claims that Android users have against iPhones could easily be leveled. Like, why Apple doesn't take advantage of this is insane. And honestly, I do have to think it probably is due to the fact that Apple definitely generates hundreds of millions, like billions of dollars off of their app store, obviously, right? Like, just beyond the cost of this phone. So yesterday, in this entire situation, one of the judges, the actual presiding individuals, the presiding judge, I believe their name is Yvonne Gonzalez, actually ended up getting in here and not only put Apple on blast, but even outright accused them of actual lying. So just to give you the overview, the court finds Apple in willful violation of this court's 2021 injunction, which issued to restrain and prohibit Apple's anti-competitive conduct and anti-competitive pricing. Again, it's a monopoly in the storefront, By way of background, after May 2021, the court issued a 180-page order which enjoined Apple's conduct impeding competition with respect to in-app or out-of-app purchases. So what they have effectively said on April 24, 2023, in a 91-page order, the Ninth Circuit reaffirmed. On January 16, 2024, the Supreme Court declined review, and the next day, the injunction was issued. So Apple's response to the injunction strains credulity. After 2 sets of evidentiary hearings, the truth emerged. Apple, despite knowing its obligations thereunder, thwarted the injunction's goals and continued its anti-competitive conduct solely to maintain its revenue stream, because the money is that important. Remarkably, Apple believed that this court would not see through its obvious cover-up, the 2024 evidentiary hearing. So literally, the court is basically saying Apple thought they were so dumb, they couldn't identify a cover-up. And the court's like, no, we knew, we know, get out of here. To unveil Apple's actual decision-making process, not the one tailor-made for litigation, the court ordered production of real-time documents and ultimately held a second set of hearings in 2025. So literally, it almost feels as if this is utilized, like what the court is accusing is effectively Apple has lied. They lied to the courts, and the court actually discovered the true nature of Apple's anti-competitive policies, which I have to remind you, this is a huge deal, okay? Like, again, when you're caught, like, it's one thing to lie, okay? It's another thing to lie to courts like this, where eventually I've heard that, again, when we go further into it, it could potentially get into some criminal civil litigation almost, right? But we'll look at that closer towards the end. So after the trial, the court found that Apple's 30% commission allowed it to reap super competitive operating margins that were not tied to the value of its IP and thus was anti-competitive. Again, Apple didn't do anything to warrant that 30% cut, which is what the court's effectively saying. Apple's response charged a 27% commission, again, tied to nothing on off-app purchases, where it had previously charged nothing, and extend the commission for a period of 7 days after the consumer linked out of the app. Apple's goal, maintain its anti-competitive revenue stream. 2, the court had prohibited Apple from denying developers the ability to communicate with and direct consumers to other purchasing mechanisms. So when you go on to, like, a lot of these apps that you download off the storefront, what'll happen is, sometimes when you're subscribing to a service, right, like Spotify, for instance, I think Spotify, but it could be different, they'll often put the 30% like tax onto you, right? And they'll tell you, if you want to save money, just go to Spotify.com, subscribe through there, and then sign in through the app on iPhone so you're not paying that Apple premium. Some people do it, some people don't. But yeah, it's one of the things that Apple genuinely felt threatened by. Apple's responses here was to impose new barriers and new requirements to increase friction, basically adding 2-3 extra steps to make somebody say, yeah, I'll just pay the 30%. And they had full-page scarce screens, static URLs, generic statements. Apple's goal to dissuade customer usage of alternative purchase opportunities to maintain the anti-competitive revenue stream, which is not something the court liked. So what they also said was to hide the truth, which this is never good for any court. The vice president of finance, Alex Roman, outright lied under oath. Oh, shit, dude. Oh, man. You do not want that written on a court record. Internally, Philip Schiller had advocated that Apple comply with the injunction, but Tim Cook ignored Schiller and instead allowed Chief Financial Officer Luca Maestri and his finance team to convince him otherwise. Cook chose poorly. The real evidence, detailed herein, more than meets the clear and convincing standard to find a violation. The court refers the matter to the U.S. Attorney of North District of California to investigate whether criminal contempt proceedings are appropriate. So again, criminal contempt proceedings. This is not good. It just keeps getting... Probably the biggest L this year has been handed over to Apple, all right? What's important here is the judge goes, this is an injunction, not a negotiation. There are no do-overs once a party willfully disregards a court order. Time is of the essence. The court will not tolerate further delays. As previously ordered, Apple will not impede competition. This is why I love the US legal system like this. Like, no matter how big of a company you are, sometimes when it clicks, you just get your balls cut, okay? It is what it is. That is awesome shit to see. Now, obviously, because of this, Fortnite has announced to come back globally on iPhones as of next week, which Apple probably is coping and seething about that. And honestly, I wouldn't doubt that they would be, but there's nothing they can literally do, okay? It's like you're going to have to let Epic literally do what they need to. And you're just going to have to kind of take it, okay? You spend 4 years in the legal system trying to hold progress, quite literally. And now it's just a matter of you absolutely going through and just straight up, opening the doors. There's no way around it anymore. So to look further into the lies, because I wanted to see how one of the executives, Roman, actually lied, right? So what they said here was the court finds that Apple did consider the external cost developers faced when utilizing alternative payment solutions for linked out transactions, which conveniently exceeded the 3% discount Apple ultimately decided to provide by a safe margin, right? So what they said was Mr. Roman didn't stop there. However, he also testified up until January 16, 2024, Apple had no idea what fee it would impose on linked out purchases. So again, question that was asked, and I take it that Apple decided to impose a 27% fee on linked purchases, correct? Answer was the decision was made that day. It's your testimony that, again, up until January 16, Apple had no idea, and of course the answer from Roman is that is correct. So again, to go down further, another lie under oath, contemporaneous business documents reveal that on the contrary, the main components of Apple's plan, including the 27% commission, were determined on July 2023. So neither Apple nor its counsel corrected the now obvious lies. They did not seek to withdraw the testimony or to have it stricken, although Apple did request that the court strike other testimony. So again, such blatant lying is not something that the courts were tolerating, right? Now, obviously, look, a court case like this has really huge implications. It has huge implications because going down the road, if this is a matter of what is now precedent, obviously, Google's probably looking at their Play Store in a similar fashion. I'm sure that video game consoles are looking at their storefronts in a pretty similar fashion. Since, the video game storefront and the smartphone gaming storefronts have some level of similar. In fact, I think most digital-facing storefronts are going to have these similar issues. Now, again, the court isn't going on them about the 30% fee that is charged for paid applications, right? Let's say somebody prices an application at $10 on the App Store. You give them 30% for that, right? Which is totally fine and understandable. Like, again, you're handling the distribution of multiple gigabytes sometimes of data, and there's other features that you provide that you may include for free or behind a subscription. But when you open an application and you're buying like COD points or like, microtransactions or anything of that nature, these sites, these storefronts are not entitled to that like easy revenue stream. So again, if you're a gamer, if you're a software developer, you absolutely won against Apple. Like, you have to take this as a massive win. And if you're Apple, the fact that you lied blatantly under oath, this could absolutely be a pretty bad situation for them going forward. But yeah, I mean, this whole 4-year saga, free Fortnite, ended with Epic literally on top, like quite literally just doing the, like, flossing on the corpse of like Apple like this. It's crazy. It's crazy shit to see. And honestly, I kind of did expect Epic Games to win this simply because from the inception of this lawsuit, it really felt like Apple was kind of on a losing ground anyways, and they were kind of waffling their way through this, especially with how this first like exchange occurred. So, if that was how it began, I wasn't really surprised with how it ended. But I am glad it ended literally in this fashion. Because ultimately, anything that fights against anti-competitive practices is ultimately a net positive for you and me, the consumer. And in a day and age where Microsoft literally jumped up prices for Xboxes by like 30% in some cases, gamers kind of did need a little bit of a win. Now, I'm not somebody that is a microtransaction enjoyer, but I'm sure for somebody that wanted to play games like Fortnite on their phone, it's kind of awesome to see that, regardless of how much Apple is kicking and screaming, it is coming back for every player on the iPhone platform. And you also don't have to give a supreme tax to iPhone or Apple just for purchasing a subscription through a third party or buying a few V-Bucks. I mean, nobody should have done that in the first place, but, it needed a 4-year-long, millions of dollars spent, super mega court case, one that would define the future of digital devices and microtransaction purchases to actually happen. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like it if you dislike it, I am out.